I never believed in signs from the universe until I met Cassian on a park bench in October. I was having the worst day of my life, sitting there at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, crying into my hands like some kind of cliché, and this guy just sat down next to me. Not across the path, not on another bench, but right there, maybe 2 feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and warm. I tried to stop crying, because that's what you do when a stranger invades your personal breakdown. I wiped my face with my sleeve and stared hard at the ground, hoping he'd get the hint and leave. But he didn't leave. He just sat there, and after a minute he said, "I'm not going to ask if you're okay, because clearly you're not, but I will say that this bench has seen me cry at least 3 times, so you're in good company." His voice was gentle, with this slight rasp to it that made everything he said sound intimate, like he was sharing a secret. I looked up at him then, and that was the first time I really saw Cassian. Dark hair that fell across his forehead, these impossibly green eyes, and a smile that was somehow both sad and kind at the same time. He was wearing a denim jacket with the sleeves pushed up, and I could see the edge of a tattoo on his forearm, though I couldn't make out what it was. 3 times, I managed to say, my voice still thick from crying. 3 times, he confirmed. Once when I failed my master's thesis defense. Once when my dog died. And once when I realized I was in love with my best friend who was engaged to someone else. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was listing items from a grocery store, and something about that made me laugh. It was a broken, watery laugh, but it was real. "Which one of those am I?" I asked. "Which one? Failed thesis, dead dog, or unrequited love?" He tilted his head, studying me with those green eyes. "Unrequited love," he said finally. "Definitely unrequited love. You've got that specific kind of devastation that only comes from wanting someone who doesn't want you back." He was right, of course. I'd just come from coffee with Marcus, my best friend since sophomore year of college, the guy I'd been in love with for 3 years without ever saying a word. Marcus had spent the entire hour telling me about his new boyfriend, about how he'd never felt this way before, about how he thought this might be the one. And I'd sat there smiling and nodding and dying inside because I'd never even told Marcus I was gay, let alone that I'd been imagining a future with him for years. "How did you know?" I asked Cassian. "Because I've been there," he said. "And because you keep touching your phone like you want to text someone, but you know you shouldn't." I looked down and realized my hand was indeed hovering over my pocket. I pulled it away, embarrassed. "I'm Cassian, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Joel," I said, shaking it. His hand was warm and his grip was firm, and I held on maybe a second too long. We talked for 2 hours on that bench. I don't even remember how it happened, how the conversation flowed so easily from one topic to another. He told me about his job as a graphic designer, about how he'd moved to the city 5 years ago with his ex-boyfriend and stayed after they broke up because he'd fallen in love with the place. I told him about my job at the publishing house, about my tiny apartment with a leaky faucet, about how I'd been trying to work up the courage to come out to my family for months. The whole time we talked, I kept noticing little things about him. The way he gestured with his hands when he got excited about something. The way he'd pause and look up at the trees when he was thinking. The small scar above his left eyebrow that he said he got falling off a skateboard when he was 12. I noticed that his laugh was infectious, that it made me want to keep saying funny things just to hear it again. When the sun started to set and the air got cold, Cassian stood up and said, "I should probably go, but this was really nice, Joel. I'm glad the universe put us on the same bench today." "Me too," I said, and I meant it. For the first time all day, I didn't feel like I was drowning. "Can I give you my number?" he asked, "in case you ever need someone to talk to or cry with. This bench is great for both." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and added his contact information. He waved as he walked away. And I sat there for another 20 minutes, just replaying the conversation in my head, trying to understand what had just happened. I texted him that night. Just something simple, thanking him for sitting with me, for making a terrible day better. He wrote back immediately, saying he'd been hoping I'd text, that he'd been thinking about our conversation all evening. We texted until 2 in the morning, and when I finally fell asleep, I did so with a smile on my face for the first time in weeks. We met up 3 days later at a coffee shop near his apartment. I got there early because I was nervous, and I spent 15 minutes pretending to read a book while I watched the door. When Cassian walked in, my heart did this stupid fluttering thing that I'd only ever felt around Marcus. Except this was different somehow. Stronger, more immediate. He ordered some complicated drink with extra shots and oat milk, and we grabbed a table by the window. The conversation picked up exactly where it had left off on the bench, like no time had passed at all. He asked me about my week, and I found myself telling him things I'd never told anyone, about my fears and insecurities, about feeling like I was watching my life happen to someone else. "I know exactly what you mean," Cassian said, leaning forward. "I spent my entire 20s feeling like I was playing a part in someone else's story. Like I was just going through the motions of what I thought I was supposed to do instead of figuring out what I actually wanted." "When did that change?" I asked. "When I stopped waiting for permission to be myself," he said. "When I realized that the only person who could give me that permission was me." There was something in the way he looked at me when he said it, something intense and knowing, like he could see right through all my defenses. I had to look away, suddenly overwhelmed by how seen I felt. We started meeting up regularly after that. Coffee dates turned into lunch dates, which turned into dinner dates, though neither of us ever called them dates out loud. We'd just text each other saying, "Want to grab food?" And then we'd end up at some restaurant talking for hours until the staff started giving us looks. I learned so much about him during those weeks. I learned that he was an only child who'd grown up in a small town in Oregon. That he'd known he was gay since he was 14. That he'd come out to his parents in high school and they'd been surprisingly supportive. I learned that he was terrible at cooking but made excellent cocktails. That he had a collection of over 200 vinyl records. That he volunteered at an LGBTQ youth center every Saturday morning. And I learned that being around him made me feel more like myself than I'd ever felt before. With Cassian, I didn't have to pretend or hide or carefully edit my words. I could just be Joel, messy and confused and still figuring things out, and that was enough. More than enough. One night, about a month after we met, we were at his apartment watching a movie, sitting on his couch with a bowl of popcorn between us. It was some indie film he'd been excited about, but I couldn't focus on it because I was too aware of how close he was, how every time he reached for popcorn, his arm would brush against mine, sending little electric shocks through my body. Halfway through the movie, he paused it and turned to me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure," I said, my heart suddenly pounding. "That day on the bench, when I said you were dealing with unrequited love, was I right? Were you in love with someone?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Are you still in love with them?" I opened my mouth to say yes, because that's what I'd been telling myself for weeks, that I was still hung up on Marcus, still nursing that old wound. But sitting there on Cassian's couch, with his green eyes searching my face, I realized it wasn't true anymore. Somewhere along the way, without even noticing it happening, I'd stopped thinking about Marcus. I'd stopped checking his social media, stopped imagining scenarios where he'd suddenly realize he had feelings for me. Because I'd been too busy falling for someone else. "No," I whispered. "I'm not." "Good," Cassian said. And then he kissed me. It wasn't like in the movies where everything suddenly makes sense and the world falls away. It was clumsy and nervous and my hands didn't know where to go, and I think I might have accidentally bumped his nose with mine. But it was also the most perfect moment of my life, because it was real and it was happening, and it was with Cassian. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine and said, "I've wanted to do that since the day I met you." "On the bench?" I asked, incredulous. "On the bench," he confirmed. "You looked so sad and so beautiful, and I knew I was in trouble the second you looked up at me. You sat down next to a crying stranger and immediately developed feelings for them? That's not healthy, Cassian." He laughed, that wonderful laugh I'd become addicted to. I never claimed to be healthy. I claimed to be honest. We spent the rest of the night on that couch, kissing and talking and kissing some more. At some point, I texted my roommate that I wouldn't be home, and Cassian made up the guest room for me, even though we both knew I'd end up in his bed, fully clothed, talking until the sun came up. Being with Cassian was different from anything I'd imagined with Marcus. It was real and complicated and sometimes scary, but it was also easy in a way that surprised me. We fell into a rhythm quickly, spending most nights together, learning each other's habits and quirks. I learned that he was grumpy before coffee, that he sang in the shower, that he had nightmares sometimes and needed to be held. He learned that I was obsessive about organizing books by color, that I stress-baked when I was anxious, that I needed time alone to recharge. 3 months into our relationship, on a cold January evening, Cassian said he wanted to show me something. We bundled up in coats and scarves, and he led me through the city to the park, to that same bench where we'd first met. "Sit," he said. And I did. He sat down next to me, in the exact spot he'd occupied that October afternoon, and pulled up his sleeve. There, on his forearm, where I'd noticed that first tattoo, was a new one. Fresh, still slightly red around the edges. It was a set of coordinates. "What is this?" I asked, tracing the numbers gently with my finger. "The exact location of this bench," he said. "I got it last week. I wanted to remember this place, this moment where my life changed." I stared at him, unable to speak. The coordinates were simple, just numbers and degrees, but they represented everything. Our beginning. The universe putting us in the same place at the same time. The conversation that saved me on my worst day and led me to my best person. "Cassian," I managed to say. "I know it's intense," he said quickly. "I know we've only been together a few months and maybe it's too soon for grand gestures, but I needed you to know how serious I am about this, about us. You're not some rebound or casual thing to me, Joel. You're everything." I kissed him then, there on our bench, with the cold wind whipping around us and the city lights starting to come on. I kissed him like I was trying to transfer every feeling I couldn't put into words directly into his body. When we finally broke apart, I was crying again, but this time they were happy tears. "I love you," I said, because it was true, and because I'd learned from him that sometimes you just have to be honest, even when it's terrifying. "I love you too," he said. "I've loved you since that first day. I just had to wait for you to catch up." We sat on that bench until we couldn't feel our fingers anymore, wrapped up in each other, making promises about the future. And when we finally headed home, I looked back at that spot, at those coordinates that Cassian now carried on his skin, and I thought about how random it all was, how I'd chosen that bench out of hundreds in the city, how he'd decided to sit down instead of walking past, how one moment of connection can change everything. 6 months later, I got my own tattoo. Not coordinates, but a small compass on my ribs, pointing north. When Cassian asked me what it meant, I told him the truth, that he was my true north, that before I met him, I'd been lost, drifting, not even aware I was looking for something, and that he'd given me direction, purpose, a reason to believe in signs from the universe. We still go back to that bench sometimes on anniversaries or when one of us is having a hard day. We sit in our original spots and remember how it all started, how a chance encounter turned into the love story I never knew I needed. And every time I see those coordinates on his arm, I'm reminded that the best things in life are often the ones we never see coming, the ones that find us when we're at our lowest and show us how high we can climb. That's the thing about love. It doesn't always announce itself with fireworks and grand declarations. Sometimes it just sits down next to you on a park bench when you're crying and says something kind. Sometimes it's patient and gentle and gives you time to heal before asking for anything in return. Sometimes it gets a tattoo of coordinates to show you that this moment, this place, this connection matters, that you matter. I never did tell Marcus about my feelings for him. It stopped seeming important once I realized what I'd felt for him was just a shadow of what I could feel, what I do feel for Cassian. Marcus is still my friend, and I'm genuinely happy for him and his boyfriend. But he's not my person. He never was. Cassian is my person, the one who saw me at my worst and stayed, the one who made me believe in myself enough to finally come out to my family, the one who holds my hand in public and introduces me as his boyfriend with so much pride in his voice it makes my chest tight. The one who got a permanent reminder of our beginning etched into his skin because he never wants to forget how we found each other. I'm writing this now, 2 years after that first meeting, sitting on our bench while Cassian runs to grab us coffee. The coordinates on his arm have healed completely, the numbers clear and dark against his skin. In a few minutes he'll come back and hand me my usual order, which he's memorized, and we'll sit here together watching the world go by, just like we did that first day. Except now I'm not crying, now I'm smiling, now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with. And if you ever doubt that the universe has a plan, that timing is everything, that love can find you when you least expect it, just remember this story. Remember that somewhere in this city there's a bench with specific coordinates, and on that bench 2 people found each other and everything changed. That's the magic of it all. That's the thing I want everyone to know. You never know which ordinary moment is going to become extraordinary, which random Tuesday afternoon is going to alter the entire trajectory of your life, which stranger is going to become your forever. So pay attention, show up, sit down next to people who are crying, be kind to strangers, get the tattoo, say I love you, take the chance. Because somewhere out there, your person might be sitting on a bench, waiting for you to find them. And when you do, when that moment comes, you'll want to remember exactly where you were standing when your whole world shifted on its axis and finally fell into place.